sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that wears its heart on its sleeve. I'm Bianca. With me always is Christy Powell.
Howdy.
And joining us again from Portland, Oregon is author and activist Chrissy Stroop. Chrissy is a prominent voice in the online ex-evangelical community and is an advocate for working alongside progressive believers to combat bigotry and political encroachment from the religious right. Last December, she released her book, Empty the Pews, Stories of Leaving the Church. And this year, she will be speaking... Oh, there it is. There's the book. And this year, she will be speaking at the American Atheist Conference in Phoenix, Arizona, which is super exciting. Thank you so much for being here, Chrissy.
Thanks so much for having me back.
Hey, so this week I was in Portland, Oregon, and I met up with Chrissy and we bonded over sushi. It was the first time I'd ever been to one of those places where they had the little conveyor belts going by. And apparently there's an amazing one here in Austin that nobody has taken me to. And I feel
It's
hurt.
like 5 minutes from the studio.
I feel hurt.
If anybody wants to put together a big group, we'll leave from the library, we'll bring V, it'll be a good time.
We need to do this.
I feel cool for having taken you to your first conveyor belt
You pop that cherry.
So many millennial points!
So while we were there, we were talking about the show because we knew that we were both going to be on this week. And we were kind of debating what to talk about. And we came up with clothing choices and how what we wear impacts us and those around us. So that's what we're going to be discussing today is sexist school dress codes and shopping while trans or non-binary and purity culture and how it burdens women's bodies. So if you have any thoughts about these concepts, if you have a story about being told what you can and cannot wear as a kid, or if you have an experience where, you went clothing shopping the first time you had come out and you were experiencing being able to pick from different groups of clothes that maybe you hadn't before. Anything that you want to share in that area, definitely give us a call. We are at 512-686-0279. That's 512-686-0279. So yeah, let's just jump kind of right into this. First, we're going to talk a little bit about clothes and religion and how religion impacts our perception of what we can and cannot put on our bodies. So kind of to get down to the root of that, we have to talk about purity culture first and foremost. So Chrissy, we all have had experiences with purity culture that I'm curious about your take on it. How would you describe it as somebody who has done a lot of research into leaving the evangelical movement?
Sure. Well, purity culture, when we use the term these days, we usually mean the sorts of things that became really big in the 1990s, like signing purity pledges, True Love Waits, Joshua Harris's book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
Story, real quick. Joshua Harris has disavowed that book, apologized to the Lgbtq community, and is no longer a Christian.
And in that order.
Very
slowly, I might add.
Yeah, and I mean, at first I was really skeptical of his apology, and to be honest, it still didn't seem. I mean, the initial thing where he made like that documentary, it just, I don't know. I still think that was kind of not that great, but it's a big deal that he publicly announced he's no longer a Christian.
Yes.
Yeah, and he and his wife are getting divorced, and lots of people are speculating about what that's all about. But
Yeah, sometimes that's definitely a thing you have to you risk when you change your worldview so substantially in a relationship like that. I just thought
sure. Although she had also shared that she was deconstructing, so.
Maybe they're like, wait, we don't have to stay together forever.
I don't want to derail things any further, and all the best to him. But I have to say, there is a perverse part of me that's very much pleased with the idea of Joshua Harris having to jump onto a dating app and experience like modern American dating culture after what he did to my high school dating experience.
Let's just hope he doesn't go into the whole
pickup artist type.
I feel like it's a quick veer into pickup
overcompensates real quick. Yeah, I could see that. I could see that real hard.
Sorry, continue, Chrissy. Purity
culture. Right. So, I don't know the exact time when abstinence-only sex education became sort of like the dominant force in I even hesitate to call it sex education. I like to call it fake sex education because abstinence only sex ed is not sex ed. But, you know, it, at least at this point, is the dominant form of so-called sex education in American public schools. And Christian schools were always doing the same sort of thing. I'm pretty sure that around the 90s, too, this was the big push for that. So, yeah, purity culture is associated with, you know, shaming children about any sort of sexual thoughts that they have whatsoever. A lot of kids get James Dobson books, like Preparing for Adolescence growing up. I mean, at least tiny little bit of credit to James Dobson. He's like, you know, if you really can't keep from masturbating, as long as you're not fantasizing, you're just mechanically masturbating, that's probably okay. It's not that simple.
I'm sure that's going to lead to some fantastic sex lives for millions of Americans.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff really, really fucked me up. And so many people. I mean, I can talk a little bit about my own experience of it.
Yeah, please do.
I guess I also want to say, though, by way of preface, that purity culture can also be understood as something kind of deeper than this, and that we can find sort of throughout, you know, radical religion and just patriarchal communities. And certainly in the United States, it would have its roots in our colonial history and in the development of white supremacism and the Puritans. You know, there is also this idea of racial purity that sometimes intersects with this idea of, you know, sexual purity. And in fact, that's really a big thing in American history when you look at how often, you know, African Americans have been unfairly accused of things like rape and then lynched in the South.
Right,
you know,
exactly. No, they are all connected in a very deep and basic way, and we've kind of learned to view all of them as separate things, separate branches on the tree, but they've all got that same root. So yeah, I'm curious about maybe can you tell us a story that religion told you about your clothes and dressing yourself and what that meant, and kind of what was the story there that was being told to you, I guess?
Well, so when I first sort of encountered purity culture, for me, being raised as a boy, it wasn't so much about clothes, you know. And I mean, I also can't say that as a kid, I really wanted that much to wear feminine clothing. I mean, I always liked wearing costumes or dressing up or kind of playing and experimenting with things. And I mean, that's why I loved Halloween, I think, because you get to be somebody else, right? And when you feel like you're somehow not, you know, living like fully in your body, or you're not really fully sort of in tune with the world around you, just like getting to be someone else for a while is great, which I think is also why I really took to theater as a kid. But in terms of the purity culture, so in sixth grade, the first half of sixth grade, I was in Indianapolis at Heritage Christian School. And then in the second half of the year, my family moved to Colorado Springs, and I was in public school for one semester. So for that first half of the year, we got what I guess you would call my first, you know, fake sex ed experience. We had this program called CPR, Creating Positive Relationships. And so I remember like two things from this. One was that they had like these half hearts that you would stick together with Velcro and then unstick them. And they were like, see, and if you stick it together and unstick it too many times, then it won't stick together anymore, which is not how Velcro works, and is definitely not how sex works. But
I don't know about you guys. I definitely it's all Velcro down.
Testing the basic, the basic mechanics just don't quite work out.
Okay, so there was that, and then there was also, you know, you got to submit like questions anonymously. So of course somebody's going to ask, well, how far is it okay to go with your boyfriend or girlfriend?
Right.
And then the people who are conducting this little horrible indoctrination show, like, shame everybody for even wanting to know that, because obviously you should stay as far back from the line as possible. But if, oh, ye of little faith, you have to have some sort of answer for this, then clearly you should stay away from, and I quote, the underwear zone.
The underwear zone. Oh, that is the new name of this show.
Anything that was supposed to be covered by underwear, in theory, that would usually be covered by underwear, is the underwear zone. But hey, I'm getting around that 'cause I'm not wearing a bra.
There you go. The underwear zone. Wow. Okay.
So that was super weird. Then I actually got some normal public school sex ed in the second half of sixth grade, and it was a very interesting contrast. But like the second half of sixth grade had so much potential for me. I started to like accept evolution in biology, I think.
Wow.
Be like, okay, I think I'm going to be a theistic evolutionist. But then my parents made me go to Colorado Springs Christian school in seventh grade. My mom had started teaching there. I mean, we moved in the middle of the year. She's a Christian school teacher. She was back in Indiana too. She is still today in Indiana because we didn't stay in Colorado Springs that long. So in seventh grade, we got even worse fake sex ed. So like
private Christian school in Colorado Springs, like junior high. That feels like a rough experience.
Well, this was right in that period so this was 1990. Hold on. This was 1994.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, it was the
Buffaloes are making their world championship or their national championship run.
And I think the 1993-1994 school year. And it was 1992 when Focus on the Family moved from its original headquarters in California to Colorado Springs.
Okay.
And this is the time that like Ted Haggard is rising to prominence, you know.
Yeah.
So it is a time of transformation in Colorado Springs.
What is it? The Third Enlightenment happening there. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened then was they took us all out on a like retreat day. And then they basically like I remember there was a part when they separated the boys from the girls, but there was also like a part where we were like all together in an assembly, and the whole day was basically like shaming and guilting. So it was like, you know, and disinformation. I mean, hashtag Christian alt facts.
Right.
That's a real hashtag. Look it up. So you know, diseases, pregnancy, horrible. Condoms cannot stop the AIDS virus. You know, I mean, all this like totally made up stuff. And so then though they got to like the more sort of less fear mongering based on supposedly horrible consequences and things that can happen to you, and more just like on, you know, you need to be pure yourself because God. And so
but you know, if that's true, that should be enough to be like, hey, God wants you to do this. That's all you need to say. You don't need to do all this fear mongering first.
They never seem to really trust God as much as they think they do.
Right? You would think. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so the guilt and the shame aspects are huge, and the fear that is implanted in people.
So I got to tell you one more thing about this.
Yeah.
So what they did then was they started telling us that, you know, again, if we had to know where the line is, you know, we should not do anything with a boyfriend or girlfriend that we wouldn't do with somebody else's spouse, because we're probably not going to marry that person. So we would be cheating on their future spouse and on our future spouse.
Yep, I've heard that one.
So that's so shitty. And
that's not how that works.
Shout out to all of our 90s kids that became polyamorous.
Right.
Then they told us, like, go sit prayerfully by ourselves. And I think they were playing, like, emotionally manipulative music. And prayerfully consider whether we wanted to sign these purity pledges that they had with them. But don't sign unless you really mean it. But, of course, we also...
But definitely sign.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know if they'd expel us if we didn't.
Right, exactly. And that's a whole other thing that we can get into, or we could if we had the time, which is the emotional manipulation portion of it, and the music and the, be sure this is what you want to do, but actually the threat of expulsion or excommunication is on the table.
Well, hell, or even just having, you know, chapel or whatever it was outdoors in Texas. I mean, that was my experience oftentimes, as being in a really crowded room with no air conditioning, and that component of it as well.
Yeah. I'm curious, Christy, do you have any stories about how purity culture impacted how you saw either yourself or other people and how they dressed?
Oh, I mean, yeah, that could be very much a show unto itself. I mean, I guess two things that very quickly pop into mind. You know, as a therapist, nobody prepared me for how many stories I was going to hear, specifically about that first haircut, about the first time that you get a haircut that, confirms your gender in these different ways. And it didn't even really occur to me until I started to hear those stories to look back and to realize how the moment I graduated high school and no longer had somebody literally holding a ruler up to my head and my shirt collar, to recognize that it was important to me to grow my hair out and things along those lines. But the other aspect of purity culture was just the way that so many people around me, because I was in the mildest, and I mean most mild of ways, gender nonconforming. And this was not a goal of mine. This was not me sticking it to the man and trying to get away with things. This was me constantly trying to butch it up, constantly trying to be who I was supposed to be, and still always falling short. And because I was constantly falling short, everybody just assumed I was gay, and people would throw slurs around. And I, in many ways, carried that stigma, which was doubly confusing because I was very much attracted to women. And so being told over and over and over that there's something wrong, that something is that you're gay, and knowing that that wasn't correct meant that my journey became incredibly confused. There was no other route to take, really. There wasn't any path laid out that I was aware of at the time.
Interesting.
It's surprising. I never got really told that or called a fag or anything, but I did get teased for just, certain ways that I didn't conform to masculine stereotypes. Well, there was also one time that my uncle's family lived in California at this time, and we went out to visit them from Indiana. And I let my cousin, who was like one of these like still phony but sort of like edgy, cool evangelicals, paint my toenails. And then I wanted to, she was like, hey, can I paint your toenails? I'm like, sure, cool, that'll be fun. So, then I came back and my parents were traveling somewhere else and my sister was traveling somewhere else and I was staying with my grandparents. My grandpa always used to make me get my hair cut a lot as a kid as well. And so I was just walking around, barefoot a lot. It was the summer and I was like, they're not saying anything. And then he finally noticed it and he said, Christopher, you look like you come straight out of San Francisco.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing.
So he made me take it
straight out of San Francisco.
Oh, that was also the summer of 1998, and I was going on an educational trip to Germany, and he told me, you are representing America. You can't go to Germany with painted toenails.
It's again just kind of this idea that anything that is not heteronormative conforming must be gay, because those are the two options. It's right and it's wrong. These ideas around gender or pansexuality or even bisexuality, really not allowable for many of us in these societies.
I was rewatching. Not rewatching, for the first time watching Will and Grace a while ago. And I was like, literally half of these plot lines would be null if they understood what a bisexual was.
Yeah,
literally half of the show would not exist.
I think funny, how I did not really get accused of being gay, but I was accused of being weird or not masculine enough. It's funny that in particular environment. Apart from you look like you come straight out of San Francisco. The gayness was not usually directly hinted at.
Oh, I want to use that as a compliment now. You are straight
You look like you just got off the trolley.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I remember for some reason, I don't know why this stuck so hard for me. I remember I think I was 12 or 13 years old, and my grandpa pulled me aside and was like, never cut your hair. Never. It is your glory. And he quoted the Bible verse, a woman's covering is her glory or whatever. And he was just like, never, ever cut your hair because that's what makes you a woman. I was like, all right, cool. And at the time, I don't know why I only just recently remembered this so vividly, because I didn't fucking care at 12. I was like, I'm going to go play over there now. See you later. But oh my gosh, the second I could, I chopped it all off. And it's been short most of my adulthood at this point. Never going back. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit, because we touched on school dress codes a little bit, holding the ruler up to your hair and your shirt collar, and a little bit about your public school experience versus your Christian school experience. Dress codes in school is a whole topic that we could cover again if we had the time. But I'm fascinated by this because I didn't go to public school. I was homeschooled, so my dress code was pajamas for the most part. So can you guys enlighten me? What was this like on the day-to-day?
I don't really recall a dress code in the public school that I was in for one semester. And then I begged my parents to let me stay in it, but they wouldn't. And Christian schools also demand that, parents who work for the schools send their kids to those schools. And so the only way you can really get out of it is to be rebellious enough to get expelled. And I was never going to do that. That's just so.
Not in the comments.
But yeah, so we also had the rule about, no hair over your ears or on your collar. I always wanted to grow my hair out some. When I started growing it out when I was a bit older, though, like in college, I had difficulty figuring out what to do with it because it's so thick. So it was a long time before I really grew it out like to this length. But I certainly wanted to do this as a kid, and the school prevented it, and my parents and grandparents prevented it. But yeah, I mean, Christian school dress codes are really hyper-focused on establishing like sort of extreme distinctions between boys and girls,
Right, exactly.
And in many cases, girls have to wear skirts or dresses. I mean, I know like the one that I graduated from, it's where I went for most of elementary and middle school, and then also for all of high school when we came back from Colorado. When I was in high school, I mean, I don't think that girls had to wear a skirt or a dress every day at that point. It was a little bit looser. But if they did wear a skirt or a dress, and a teacher thought it was borderline not like below the knee, she'd make them kneel to do a skirt check. And it was like, nothing equivalent to that happened to boys. Like, this could happen in front of the entire class. And then she could be sent like to change or to go home if there was nothing to change into. And there were things where like, I was jealous of what the girls could do that we couldn't, because like we usually couldn't wear shorts, and sometimes it was hot. Like they didn't have air conditioning back then, but girls could wear culottes. Why couldn't I wear culottes?
Yeah.
Girls could wear certain kinds of sandals or open-toed shoes. Why couldn't I?
Yeah.
I mean, mostly the girls, let's be honest, got the shitty part of it, but I was jealous of those things.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, I know for myself, like I still can't wear khaki pants. After years and years and years of that being the only option.
To be fair, that is not a tragedy, though.
It's really not.
That's just good
fine.
Taste.
But you're right. There was an incredible distinction between men's and women's clothing, and that was kind of really the whole point. It felt like is to create these really firm gender lines at a time where people are sort of developing a gender identity, and that was very prescriptive. It was like you fit into this category exclusively.
Right, exactly. I found this amazing article on The Pudding, which is the sexualized message of dress codes and that are being sent to students. And they say something interesting here. They say the practice of commenting on someone else's body and imposing sexuality upon them, whether they intend to be sexy or not, falls squarely into the APA's definition of sexualization. And while the APA acknowledges that anyone can be sexualized, they suggest that girls are most at risk. So there is also that component of it, which is, okay, so we've got these dress codes, and on the surface, maybe they seem reasonable. Maybe they seem like you can justify, oh, well, this is why we want this or this to be the way they are. But on a deeper level, you get into it a little bit, and it becomes, why are these adults, mostly, at the top levels, the principals and stuff, mostly male, people, like, asking these girls to cover up their midsection, to cover up their cleavage. Like, the idea that is something they think about and then patrol for, much less, is very disturbing.
And I
Purity
know
culture is the flip side of rape culture. It
without
really
a doubt.
is.
It is the other side of the same coin.
Yeah, well, and another component of all of this, I apologize. I kind of lost my thread there. Go.
Oh, you are fine. Yeah.
I would just like to say that I never thought the dress codes were reasonable. I always hated them.
No, I don't know a kid who does think they're like okay. Like every single child that I've actually talked to or heard weigh in on this has been like, this fucking sucks. This is awful. This doesn't make sense.
And another thing about purity culture is our schools couldn't even have dances. But high school, we had banquets instead, right?
Yeah.
So
I remember those.
Yep.
every year there was a Christmas banquet and a junior senior banquet with, they would get a nice venue and you would get a nice meal and they would get some wholesome Christian entertainment, like a Christian ventriloquist. I'm not making that up.
Yep. Saw so many terrible bad Christian stand-ups.
Oh, it's so bad.
You're not like, you're allowed to lock arms, right, to walk in and whatever, but you can't even dance. And they were very strict again about the modesty, and the modesty stuff is very much playing into patriarchy, rape culture, it's because the burden is always on the girls to cover up. So They had all these rules. Guys are just like, oh, just go run a tux, Girls are like, okay, I have to find a dress that doesn't have spaghetti straps, isn't strapless, doesn't have whatever else, Yeah.
Well, an aspect of this too, whether we're talking about, formal wear at a dance or just your regular school uniform, I know we're largely talking about private schools, but even still, there's a significant aspect of poverty discrimination.
Oh, without a doubt.
You have all of these high school kids who are rapidly growing and changing and have these shifting bodies, and we're telling them that the skirt that they got away with last week, they cannot wear this week because it no longer fits appropriately. And it was a major concern for a lot of the folks that I went to school with to be able to afford a new uniform on a regular basis. And I recognize that component is happening for everybody who's in high school, everybody who's going through puberty, everybody who is growing up is having to, routinely grow out of clothes and things like that. But to compound that with the shame and the public attention, to have, teachers calling out the fact that you're wearing something that is inappropriate because you can't afford something else.
Right. Also, the very real fact that for a lot of people, like, they don't notice it becoming quote unquote inappropriate on the day to day. It's like, this is a shirt, I've worn it for a month, and now all of a sudden it doesn't fit me anymore. But I've been seeing myself every day in the mirror, so I'm not noticing. But somebody else comes along. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And that's also going to disproportionately affect girls rather than boys. I mean, also with things like, the neckline and, where's the back on your top or your dress or whatever.
Yeah, there are other ways that clothing choice kind of falls into these legislative areas, whether or not they're actual laws on the books. There are the rules for individual schools. There's also, there's apparently in Durango, Colorado, it is still technically illegal to go out of the house dressed in clothing, quote unquote, unbecoming to one's sex. I've done a little bit of research, a little bit of digging. This seems like a thing that is real. I had to triple check. So if it's been overturned or whatever, someone from Durango, please let me know in the comments. But this sounds very much like a holdover of certain other rules that were kind of imposed on the LGBTQ community as a whole back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah, stuff that came up in the Stonewall era, as a point of contention, the 3 articles of clothing rule.
Right, exactly, which wasn't actually a law in the books, apparently. It was just something that was being used as an excuse. I think it was based off of masquerade laws that had been in place for a completely different reason, and they were just using it to justify illegally searching and honestly sexually abusing the people who were wearing clothes that they did not like. So yeah, this is an ongoing and consistent thing that is occurring here.
And you can also think about who gets to go shirtless and why. And men were not allowed to go shirtless in the 1930s. That's when they started kind of just bucking that rule and going shirtless on beaches and they started to change things, but we still aren't even close to topless equality for women across the country.
Oh, for sure. Anybody who's been following this one kind of horrific case in Utah, there was a woman and her husband, and they were doing, I believe, some kind of housework, fixing a kitchen cabinet or whatever it was. And they both were topless in their home with their stepchildren, just working. And I believe it was like a neighbor or somebody came to visit and caught her with her shirt off, and she was charged with lewdness. And that was back in November. Before the show started, Chrissy and I actually were wondering where this ended up. And it turns out that she has pleaded guilty because the implications of appeals and going to trial were just too great, and too much was being put on her. So she has been charged and is convicted with lewdness. And the good news, and this is posed as good news in this article, is where is it? Okay, the plea will be held in abeyance, meaning the charge will be dismissed after a year if she does not, quote, commit any new crimes, and also pays $600. So her husband, by the way, not a problem. Like, he was not brought into this at all. So this is, and Chrissy, you were saying this seems to fall directly against a larger court.
Yeah, I mean, this is very depressing outcome, but also Utah and Colorado are in the same circuit. I'm pretty sure. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is all the 10th Circuit. And in Fort Collins, Colorado, they had a law in the books banning women's toplessness. Some cities in Colorado have actually allowed topless equality. So they had a citywide municipal ordinance, banning topless equality. And somebody challenged it. And the city basically decided not to appeal, not to defend it. So there is a 10th Circuit ruling that, as far as I know, stands that in theory would mean that it's not a crime for women to go topless throughout the 10th Circuit. But I don't know how that squares with, the Utah thing, if it squares at all.
That would be interesting to look up, because I know that her lawyer suggested that she plead guilty, which annoys the fuck out of me. Sure. I don't know the guy, but I want to sock him one. But also, you would imagine that if it was as simple as, hey, this ruling had already been passed down in this circuit, that would have been caught. Hopefully, you would hope. You would think so, but these are probably Mormons we're talking about. So even if they know, they might not even do the right thing. Shit, I didn't even think about that, but you could be correct with that. Yeah, it's the second you start digging into, okay, what do our laws say about clothes, and where does that burden fall, right? Which people are impacted by these laws and who's making them? It gets very dark very quickly.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah, about that Fort Collins ordinance, there was some really weird language that was used to defend it. And let me see if I can find this again. Oh, yeah. So the 10th Circuit ruling rejected the city's concern that striking down the ordinance would lead to women, quote, parading in front of elementary schools or swimming topless in the public pool.
I really hope that a bunch of women got together and organized exactly those things.
Yeah. At least swimming in the public pool. I mean, that should be totally normal.
Right? That should be fine.
I don't know why anyone really wants to parade in front of elementary schools without a shirt on, but if men can do it, women should be able to do it too.
I was about to say, I feel like men never parade, at least straight men. Parading is exclusively the realm of women and queer folks.
I need to confirm this. In my undergrad, my Christian undergrad, the only people allowed to go topless were the soccer team. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, did they parade? You would be walking down your path on your way to school, and boom, just like 15 sweaty shirtless dudes just run past.
College.
There were some scarring moments, I will say. They had this thing where they would do every Christmas season, every winter, before everyone left for their holiday break. They would do a streak where they'd wear Santa hats. down there in their underwear zone.
Uh-huh.
How do you strap on the Santa hat? I mean, you have to.
Honestly, I did not look hard enough to figure that out. But they would go and they would just run around campus and like terrorize these poor innocent Christian girls, just like, oh my God, impure thoughts. It was awesome. All right, so let's take a break from the interview for a minute. And we did get an email this week from someone who is struggling with sexuality and gender a little bit.
Sure. It reads, I'm a teen and have been an atheist for about a year and am now awakening to my sexuality and gender. One of the pillars of my atheism is that even when I thought I felt Jesus and the Holy Spirit, it could be explained by processes in the brain, and I get the same feeling when I talk to myself in my head and listen to music that I connect with. With this model, when I first felt my sexuality, I could see the reaction of the feel-good chemicals and the physical indicators of that sexuality. I have felt non-binary for several months now, and the feeling keeps getting stronger and stronger as time goes on, but I can't seem to find or make a logical argument to how I know that I am non-binary, like I can with my sexuality. And the situations logically seem closer to feeling the Holy Spirit than it does with my sexuality. I've considered going to therapy, but I'm still financially and transportation dependent on my parents and would need to explain myself to very Christian and conservative parents that I have to logically justify everything I feel, from politics to sexuality. Thank you for any response. This has been heavy on my mind for a long time.
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison that they draw between feeling like you need to logically and scientifically justify things, and that things you cannot logically and scientifically justify you can do away with them without worrying. And for things like, yeah, it's tricky because like with sexuality, you can to a certain extent say, hey, this is what I feel, this is why I feel that way. With gender, it is a little bit more fluid and a little bit more squishy. You can make the case that it is something that's, it's presentation based. It's how you interact. It's your culture, your individual culture of one, right? It's impacted by everything that you do and you think and how people perceive you. So it isn't this black and white kind of binary ABC type situation. And it is going to change usually. It's not, you don't, there's this belief, and for some people this may be the case, that you find your one gender identity and it's that for forever, and you know it and you found it and that's it and you're done. But for me, I know I've experienced a lot of changes in how I view myself and my gender, and it still is under that term, that umbrella term, non-binary, but it'll change. It'll shift from day to day.
Sure.
And I've noticed it shifting in this particular direction over the last year. So it is also a journey, and it's something that you should be open to kind of figuring out, and maybe don't try and put a pin in it and say, this is what it is, this is how I prove it,
Lock it into one particular thing.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
one
it
of
doesn't
the
have to be, and
pitfalls.
it's certainly not a race, to figure it out.
Exactly. Everybody is going at it at their own timeline as well.
Yeah, it's worth noting that this is a teen, I might add, very well-spoken teen who's still grappling with these issues. But I think that's an important point, that there's no rush to get all of this sorted, and to recognize that these are formative years where it's going to be shifting at a more rapid rate, perhaps, than oftentimes throughout the rest of life. Another piece I just want to comment on is this is sort of one of the pitfalls of skepticism. It's still the important value to hold on to when you're wanting to have evidence, you're wanting to have logic, you're wanting to be able to track and measure and understand. But your gender is it's a feeling. You know, it doesn't have a meaning beyond that. It's a sensation, really. And sensations are not something that we're very good at measuring, very good at understanding. And so, yes, you do want to be, I guess, somewhat careful about sort of just declaring my gender. You want to understand and explore yourself. But I would say more than anything, if you feel boyish, if you feel girlish, if you feel envy, wherever you stand with that,
just
that's
feel
enough.
ish.
Well, the simple fact that you feel it means it's true.
Right.
And that can be a really difficult thing to hold on to while still maintaining a skeptical mindset.
Well, a good rule of thumb for this is that maybe overused skeptical maxim, which is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Sure.
So I understand the mindset of, okay, so I've dismissed this concept of the Holy Spirit because it's a feeling, because I can't back it up with science, et cetera, et cetera. So why am I not expected to also do that with this experience of being non-binary? And the difference there is the weight of the claim itself, right? So you're looking at this one claim, there is a Holy Spirit, right? What else is that saying? That's saying that there's a supernatural realm. They're saying that this realm is something that impacts you on your day-to-day, and that you also have some kind of secondary substance, like a substance dualist kind of approach to experiencing consciousness outside of your brain. And it implies, an eternal life of some kind, an afterlife, and it implies that there is a God. And so it has all of these secondary claims to it that really, if they're true, would not only be much more apparent than they are, but also, yes, you would need to be able to prove that because it's an important, like, life-changing, soul defining really kind of concept. And that's not to say that experiencing your gender correctly and realizing what you are and embracing that is not also life-changing. But if you compare the weight of everything being claimed with the concept of a Holy Spirit in comparison with people have genders, we know this already. We know that non-binary people exist. We know that trans people exist. So saying that you fall into that category really isn't that big of a claim, right? So there is definitely a little bit more room to say, hey, we know this thing exists. This has been agreed upon. And so, yes, I can also be this.
Sure.
And if I could add something to that, I think,
please.
If you want to talk about, the feeling of maybe just self-transcendence or in tuneness with being or euphoria that some people associate with what they consider to be a spiritual experience or experiencing the Holy Spirit. We definitely know that something physiological is going on there. And our bodies have physiological responses and emotional responses to all kinds of things. And a lot of people on the trans spectrum, when they reach some kind of breakthrough about understanding themselves or imagining themselves as they want to be, or they get on hormones, they sometimes experience some kind of euphoria as well. And so, I think it's clearly going to be something physiological relating to, whatever has just affected you. And it seems to me that, if the whole Holy Spirit thing is also just something that's kind of happening in you because you're processing things, then maybe there is kind of an interesting parallel to draw there, but it doesn't mean that there is this transcendent spiritual realm, and it doesn't mean that you have to doubt your experience of your gender. And when I first kind of realized and started to accept it to myself that I'm a woman, it felt really good. It was a major breakthrough. And some people on the trans spectrum, when they start getting hormones, and of course some non-binary people sometimes take low doses of hormones, or people figure out what they want to do in order to feel more like they feel like they're supposed to be. Sometimes that also leads to experiences of euphoria. It didn't, for me, lead to euphoria exactly, but I've been overall, a lot happier since I got on hormones, and as I've noticed the changes. And I also have had very little suicidal ideation since then, and I used to have suicidal ideation all the time, like from the time I was a small kid. A lot of my life, I felt like an impossible person who shouldn't exist, and that is actually how I framed it in my mind from the time I was maybe 19 or 20 years old. I'm an impossible person who shouldn't exist. And so, yeah, it sucks to feel like that. And for me, I think a lot of people on the trans spectrum too really do have doubts. Like, well, what if I'm wrong about this? Mm-hmm. Well, two things. Nobody's going to go through all the difficulties of some kind of transition, even, social transition or changing your self-presentation, whether or not you get hormones or surgeries involved, still a big deal, and it's going to have a social impact. And nobody does that just for attention or whatever, right, or to be rebellious. But I think what really confirmed it for me was just how much better I feel in my body, though I'm still making progress. And that absence of suicidal ideation after I got on hormones is like, yep, estrogen was missing. That was the missing thing.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, there is a tendency, especially if you are a new atheist, not a new atheist, but a new atheist, baby atheist, who is absorbing a certain kind of worldview from the Four Horsemen type, or the old guard of the YouTube atheists who, like Sargon, Thunderfoot, like all those people. Then there's definitely this instinct to be like, oh, emotion bad,
right,
logic good. And it's not that simple because they're not distinct things.
Nothing works that way.
Yeah, the phenomenology of all of this can be really confusing. I mean, it says right here in the letter, I felt Jesus and the Holy Spirit, but then it could be explained by processes in the brain, and talks later about the reaction of feel-good chemicals. Well, if there was a Jesus, whether he's metaphysical and, a Holy Spirit that, is this weird loose consciousness, or even if it's just a person of Jesus, the way you would know that is through chemical reactions in your brain. I mean, everything that you're receiving, everything that you understand about the world, the science textbook that you're reading, the only way you're able to read it is through a series of chemical reactions that are happening throughout your brain and throughout the rest of your body. So to somehow separate the world into what is a chemical reaction and what is not, is to separate the world into what is a sensation and what is, I guess, death. What is it?
What is non-existence?
We don't have unmediated access to what is out there, right?
Right.
All our empirical
data,
data,
truth and reality, is through a lens.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly gender is a thing that is in our heads and in our brains, but that doesn't mean it's not real, right? It's like when Harry Potter is like dead temporarily and he meets Dumbledore and he asks, "Sir, is this happening in my head?" And Dumbledore says, "Of course it's happening in your head, Harry. But why would that mean it isn't real?"
You've been sitting on that impression for a while.
Okay. All right. Let's do the rest of the interview in the Dumbledore voice, if possible.
It's the contrast that you really need both.
It's really good. No, I think you're spot on. And the last thing I'll say about this before we move on to, we have a couple calls that I'd love to get to.
Absolutely.
The last thing I'll say about this is you also have to remember the difference between a prescriptive and a descriptive definition of something. Mm-hmm. So something like Jesus, something like God, something like the Holy Spirit, these are prescriptive things that we tell people exist out there in reality. It's an ontological claim, right? To describe oneself as non-binary is a descriptive definition, right? You are describing what you are. And there's a very big difference in how you should approach those two separate claims. If you describe yourself as a non-binary person, congratulations. Non-binary people exist because you described yourself as such. And then what is a non-binary person? You are. That is different than claiming that there is an ontological truth out there that you must have access to without anything other than feel-good chemicals in your brain.
I like when you say words like ontological.
Yeah, I know. It just occurred to me. I was like, yeah, we took this team to school.
Words are sexy.
Yeah. I hope
that's why I do it. I don't know what it means, but I know it makes it sound good. So.
Well, and then just to a writer, I would say that I hope that some of this helps sort of suss out some of the arguments, and you can look at things in a very intellectual and scholastic way, and there's great value in that, but ultimately this is about your personal experience, and so we just encourage you to enjoy the journey rather than define it.
Right. And again, it's not a race, that there's no timeline. So if you can't express yourself fully in the way that you want to right now, that sucks, and I get it. And it's the reason we do shows like this is so people like you feel less alone. But that's also okay. You're not missing anything right now that you should be doing. There's no checklist right now. So just let you know that.
All right. Well, you ready to jump on the phones?
Yeah, let's jump to some callers.
Colleen?
Yes, let's talk to Colleen.
All right. Howdy. What can we do for you tonight? Hey, Colleen, are you able to hear us? All right, I'm going to put you on hold and give that a try here in a moment.
Standing in a wind tunnel or something.
Let's go ahead and speak with Nick. Nick, what can we do for you tonight?
Hi, everybody. I was just calling in because today we were talking about, like expressing your gender, and if you feel that you a certain way about gender, to kind of explore it,
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to call in because over the past couple months, I've just been questioning my gender identity, and I'm kind of wondering if I'm trans, and I always just kind of felt this way a little bit, but it's kind of gotten stronger recently, and I kind of thought about it more because I used to work somewhere, and I had a trans coworker, and it just made me think about my own identity, and I guess I'm kind of just wondering where I go from here.
That is a great question. Chrissy, do you want to jump on this real quick?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so, your feelings of this are absolutely valid, Nick. And I would say that if this is something that you can't ignore, then it's worth trying to take some steps to explore it. So I don't know if you have, say, any women's clothing or access to makeup. I mean, you could just try some things on and see how it feels, You don't necessarily have to start with, say, talking to a doctor about hormones. I can also say that I think, good doctors, like the doctor that I go to, she doesn't start anyone on this really quickly. She says she starts you on a low dose. You take that for a month. They do labs and take your levels of everything. And she always asks people at the end of that first month, do you want to stop? Just to make sure that people still understand that they absolutely have permission to quit, and that, maybe there will be some people who really did figure out that, no, they're not trans after all, that they didn't get what they expected to get out of being on the hormones. She also says that in her experience of, treating a lot of trans patients for many years, she only remembers one person ever actually saying, yeah, I do want to stop. So I don't know. That may or may not be you, and gender can be fluid. But if you're having these feelings and they're persistent, there's a reason for that.
Okay, yeah, I definitely am having some persistent feelings and questioning about it. And I just really, until now, I've just been wondering if these feelings, were real or not, because, growing up as a Christian in a Christian school, you're taught that you have to conform to a gender identity, and, that any of these feelings are sinful or wrong. And it just makes me feel very insecure about it. Just knowing, because of my past growing up as Christian in a Christian school, it makes me feel like I can't have these feelings.
Right.
I totally get that. And I've been there. And I mean, when you grow up with this kind of experience, it often leads to delayed recognition of queerness. I mean, in some cases, even if people are gay or bisexual, or if you're on the trans spectrum, and I could not figure out why I always felt uncomfortable in my own skin, why I was coping by living in my head and not being very well embodied, for my entire life. It didn't all come together because I didn't have the mental toolkit for it to come together. Plus I had all the baggage and the shame from purity culture and these strict gender roles prescribed by conservative Christianity. I didn't figure it out till I was 33. So again, it's not a race at all. And it seems also that it's more common if, for example, you are more attracted to women than men, or maybe you're only attracted to women. I think a lot of people don't understand that gender and sexuality operate on entirely separate spectra that are independent. That was a very important piece of the puzzle that I did not know until I was 33, and then that really helped the pieces come together, because I've always experienced attraction to women. So every time that the issue would come up of me not being very masculine, I could fall back on that, right? And that made me think that, well, I must be a straight guy. So it often happens that trans women who are lesbians or bisexual, and I have now realized I can be attracted to men too, but I still mostly experience attraction to women, end up realizing their gender identity later, because growing up, we just don't get, we still get a lot of, emphasis on binary stuff and heteronormative stuff. And we just don't get told that, oh, you know what? Even though you were born with, you were assigned male at birth, let's say, you can be a girl and you can also be a lesbian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Nick, from there, I would encourage you to fantasize about these things rather than asking yourself questions and trying to, dig deep for answers that may not come comfortably because of this traumatic blockage and different things. To just sort of imagine yourself, as Chrissy said, trying on makeup, trying on conventional women's clothing and these different things. Or if you're not at that point, to do it in your mind, to just imagine yourself in these situations. Beyond that, I would really like to recommend How to Understand Your Gender by Meg John Barker. A very easy, very accessible read that I think may help open some doors, or at least ask some good questions for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and I'm going to write that book title down because I want to read it now too. But I think a third thing that you could try, you've already mentioned that kind of being around a trans coworker and having that exposure to somebody has kind of helped you open up your own ideas about what you could be and, what possibilities there are out there. So another thing I would suggest is to try and go find some trans or non-binary YouTubers or content creators out there. There's so many good ones.
Go ahead and shout out your favorites. We know they're coming.
Let's see. Okay. Natalie Wynn, Ty Turner, Kat Black, what's his name? Jamie Dodge. There are some just really, really amazing people out there who are putting out content that not only addresses, other things, and also they happen to be trans, but also talk about the trans experience quite a lot and in intimate detail. A lot of the time they are doing what I consider to be a massive service to people. Just putting their lives out there for other people who are questioning. Like I used to be, like you are, to consume and to see, oh, that's exactly how I would describe my experience, or that's the name of the thing that I've been feeling and I didn't realize it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'll list some people to check out in the description of this video. But yeah, I would definitely suggest making sure that you're incorporating some trans and non-binary content creators into your internet diet.
Mm-hmm. And let me just add, if you do have the possibility of connecting with a questioning support group locally, do that as well. And just, wherever you end up with this, knowing that you're not alone is a really freeing and healing thing sometimes.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice, guys. Thank you so much. I was just very nervous to call in. And like I said, I've just always thought that these feelings were just something that I shouldn't be having. And I just listened to the show and I'm like, well, I should call in and tell about how I'm feeling. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So glad you called.
Oh, so glad. Thank you so much for calling in, Nick.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
It strikes me that if he hasn't already, Nick may very well benefit from watching our discussion last week with Dr. Reyes. We were talking about some of the thought policing and the sort of mental blockages that religious trauma can inflict upon us. I know that discovering my own gender, my own sexuality, was hugely hampered by being told that it was wrong to even be exploring these ideas.
Exactly. Why? How are you going to discover anything if the actual thought of that thing is discouraged?
Yeah, absolutely.
Take captive every thought.
Right, exactly.
That is my least favorite verse, I think, of any, including the really horrific ones. The take captive every thought for Christ.
It may be the most insidious one, and it's
Yes.
probably the one that comes up in my counseling practice more than perhaps any other
That's
idea.
interesting.
I mean, so often, and again, we talked about this a bit last week, so I don't want to too much retread for the audience, but so often I will have people just flooded with a relief the moment I tell them that feeling angry is okay, that feeling jealous is okay, that your emotions are not something that you need to be responsible for.
Exactly.
You do need to take responsibility for your actions, but you can feel and think whatever you need to. So with that, I'm told that we do have Colleen back on the line, so I'm going to give that another try if we can. Colleen, can you hear us okay? All right. Well, I guess we're still getting that sorted out. I apologize.
All right. So, yeah, we'll give Colleen a chance to maybe get back on the line one more time, and we'll talk to them hopefully after this last interview block. So the last thing that we're going to talk about today kind of very neatly ties into both the email and the call that we got, which is wearing clothes that feel right, and how your fashion choices and your stylistic preferences and the clothes that you buy really impact how you see yourself and how you present and how other people interact with you. Of course, the people who are impacted the most by both the religious codes of dress that we've discussed and also the legal ones are women and the LGBTQ plus community. So looking at that second group for this last bit, how is being able to wear the clothes you want crucial to your identity? I know for me, my shopping style and how I choose clothes has vastly changed. And actually gotten a lot easier. It used to be extremely stressful and anxiety-inducing and just emotionally exhausting to go clothes shopping because there was like, this should make me feel good and it looks good, but it doesn't, and I don't know why. And it was just very, very exhausting. And I don't go clothes shopping a lot. Like maybe 4 times a year will I actually go with the intention of buying clothes. But I was in Portland and I had to hit up Buffalo Exchange hello shirt. But also I went and I picked up a shirt that I was like, this looks cute. I probably am not going to like it for reasons that, it doesn't affirm my gender very well. It's very flowery and poofy and floral, but it looks fun. So I'll try it on. And I tried it on and it looked good. It just didn't look like me. And the ability to make that differentiation and say, hey, this is a good shirt. I look good in this. I don't want it. was extremely freeing and validating to me. And I was very quickly able to go through this I like, this I don't. And I walked out without feeling any of that anxiety, any of that stress, which is something I'm only just now realizing on air. Wow, that's a thing that happened.
That's beautiful.
But yeah, it's exciting to realize what works and why, I guess. Chrissy, I'm assuming you have similar stories like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still, I think, kind of figuring out my style. It's great to have permission to do that. I also, still have a lot of anxiety about how people are going to read me in public and then how they're going to respond to certain behaviors, like using a women's bathroom or trying on women's clothes. So when I was a little kid, I didn't enjoy shopping. I thought it was really boring. In fact, that was one thing that I would latch onto to like tell myself that, yeah, I'm a boy, because I didn't like doing any of the, other stuff that the boys and men did in our family. But I could sort of join in and like, oh yeah, these women and they're shopping. Like that's so boring. But so now I do enjoy shopping for clothes. But it still gives me some anxiety in a lot of places to be shopping for women's clothing, less than it used to. And it also depends on where I am. So like in Portland, not so much most of the time. But yeah, so the first time that I bought women's clothing for myself, I was with this great couple that I know. in Atlantic coastal Spain. We went to Santiago de Compostela. These are women that, well, one of them I've been friends with for since college, because they're German. They work for a tour company and they lead bike tours through these beautiful regions of Spain, and they live there. Mm-hmm. And so I was her friend before she even realized she was a lesbian and came out as a lesbian. But yeah, so it was really meaningful to me that the first time that I ended up buying a dress for myself, like they took me shopping in Spain, but I was so nervous about going into like the changing room and stuff and what were people going to do. But it was fine. And then I got to enjoy wearing that dress some on the rest of the trip, though not in public at that point because I was too nervous to, you know. And yeah, now when I shop for women's clothing, I enjoy it a lot more. And I also still wonder, is anyone going to yell at me for going into like the changing room with all this stuff?
Sure.
Yeah. And that's a real concern as well. That's something that is, you know, unfortunately a real possibility that there is going to be that backlash. And that is something I understand is something that I experience as privilege. Is that's not something I have to think about as much. So yeah, there's definitely, no matter where you fall on that gender spectrum, there are things that you are going to have to deal with that are unique to your experience.
So, you know, there's, I mean, in patriarchy, there's a whole lot of policing of masculinity, which kind of paradoxically creates a few spaces where, you know, people assigned female at birth can have a little bit more freedom, actually, than people assigned male at birth, or people who will be read as male when they're walking down the street. So, you know, the gay man and the trans woman are extremely threatening to, you know, patriarchy and, you know, the British Empire. And that, I mean, a lot of the stuff comes from Victorian England, right? This like very strict sort of policing of the gender binary, because you have to have like good, robust men to rule over their families and also Africa.
There, I see no lies. Yeah. It's fascinating to follow these trains of thought and these logical contortions all the way down to that baseline, that root.
I mean, you know, there were sodomy laws affecting gay men, and there were not technically the same laws for women.
Exactly.
I mean, not that, you know, women were supposed to get it on together, but, you know, there was
that
definitely
another issue.
There was definitely worry about masculinization of women, and you see that in the kind of misogyny that you see in like the posters that are against the suffragists. For example, in Britain, if we're drawing on Victorian Britain, but, you know, and later, but the fear of feminization of men is somehow even more intense, or at least policed more in certain areas.
Yes. And that's something we were actually talking about with, I was talking about this on Twitter with somebody, the hashtag #ByMenExist was trending, I believe, yesterday or the day before. And I posted something about how bi men are the best. And then we were talking, and we're like, why is it okay for women to be bi and it's not okay for men to be bi, or why don't they think that bi men exist? And it's exactly that as well. It is the concept that it's acceptable for women to do manly things because manly things are good, but it's not acceptable for men to do woman things because they are less good. It's just this very strange dynamic that is so outdated if you actually voice it, and nobody very few people, I would imagine, would actually subscribe to that logic when
except for certain TERFs, because they are willing to forgive. True. They're willing to forgive trans men because it's understandable that they want access to male power, right? But trans women, they're just a bunch of fetishists who want to invade women's faces, according to this way of thinking.
Naturally,
yeah, it's very, very disturbing to see that faction of feminists going off in that direction, because it really is like pure regression, right? Like continuing to ascribe what does it mean to be a woman, your body parts and your ability to reproduce. Like, isn't that what we're trying to like get away from, is the idea that this is what makes you who you are and how you should be identified? Like, I don't know. Again, if we had the time, I would rant on that for quite a while.
Speaking of England
have
and
a couple
Harry Potter.
other callers, actually. And it is getting a little bit close to the end of the episode, so I do want to make sure we take these if we can.
Absolutely. Let's jump in with Eli from Canada. Eli, what can we do for you tonight?
Hi. I'm calling because I do have a bit of a dilemma. I'm in my mid-40s, and a couple of years ago, due to some health concerns, I went through andropause. And I was always a very, very sexual person. I was born male. I identify as male. I am gay. And yeah, sexuality has always been a really part of my identity. I have a porn channel. I mean, I'm not, super popular, but I do have a couple of dedicated fans and have been doing that for a while. And this andropause thing has just kind of sent that whole thing into a tailspin. I didn't even realize that andropause was a thing until it happened to me. And I was experiencing all these weird changes, like my genitals shrunk, my body hair fell off. Like I went years with no sexual interest at all. And it was actually after a stroke. So I just assumed that everything came from that, And after a few years, everything, I recovered from the stroke and everything, pretty much went back to normal, except for these things. So 3 years later, I talked to the doctor about it, and it turns out that they tested my testosterone levels, and they were what they were termed as castration levels, which I thought was very unflattering terminology.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
But so I am on testosterone replacement therapy now, and my sexual ability has returned. I'm physically able to function in that respect. But the desire just doesn't seem to be coming back. Like it's sort of like I can take it or leave it kind of situation. And to be frank, I'm kind of mourning the loss of my sexuality.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I definitely hear that. And I can appreciate where you're coming from in terms of mourning. And I think that that's going to be part of the acceptance process, which is really kind of what we're looking at here. Certainly, I want to encourage you to continue to be working with your doctors and to make sure that you're managing your hormones and things along those lines. But a lot of this is going to be about finding appropriate workarounds, and deciding what you are interested in, what you would like to maybe push, but accepting the fact that your body has changed. And the reality is you're not alone in this. Certainly, you have had a very unique and difficult experience, but I want to acknowledge that everybody's bodies are changing. And so it's really about trying to find the right sexuality for you now and being okay with the fact that it's not going to look like it did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and that it may not look like it does on TV or in the movies.
Yeah, or even my own movies.
Yeah, sure. It's definitely sounds like a very difficult loss to go from one thing to another. It sounds like it's been a really challenging experience.
It really has, yeah. And it's kind of surprising to me the different places that I do get pressure from. Like, I'm always getting fans on my channel. I don't have very many fans, but I do have a couple of hardcore fans, concerned about me. I remember I posted a video that was, some old footage that was, pre all of this stuff that I hadn't gotten around to posting. Mm-hmm. And, one guy was like, "Where have you been?" I just feel I don't really want to say performance pressure, quote unquote, but I don't know. I almost feel like I have a reputation to live up to, and it's kind of, I don't know. It's just difficult for me to wrap my mind around the fact that that might not come back.
If it helps you to use this term, it sounds like what you're experiencing is a kind of identity loss. And so, when we have a major change in our identity, it's very disruptive. And it is something that can be mourned and that often needs to be mourned for us to be able to move forward. But I really liked what Christy said just about how everyone's changing all the time, and we need to find ways to accept it ultimately, And who we are.
Yeah. And I know that, hormone levels change over time, and, that's just a part of growing older is a decrease in sex drive. But this was kind of like, hitting a brick wall.
Sure.
And just came as a shock.
That is rough.
Well, and I
Yeah.
do want to lead with everything that we said about finding a level of acceptance, and I want to encourage you to do whatever you need to do to get to that place, whether that means working with a therapist or these different ideas. I will sort of add in that at least a component of all of this may be the fact that for several years you weren't flexing that particular muscle. And so while I do want to encourage you to be looking to sort of learn and accept and enjoy your body as it currently stands, I hope that you're also sort of exploring it and that you are, not forcing yourself, not pressuring yourself, not making yourself do anything you don't want to do, but that you're willing to say yes when there might be 49 or even 51% of you that might otherwise say no, and to kind of take it out for a test drive, see if you can get your sea legs back, so to speak.
Yeah, I'd also say that probably feeling, I know the term performance pressure might not be 100% applicable, but feeling that, hey, where have you been? When are you going to do more stuff? What's going on? That can't be helpful to the situation either. So giving yourself a little bit of space and a little bit of time, maybe away from that environment to just, reconnect with yourself outside of who you're supposed to be for your fans.
Yeah, that is good advice. I really appreciate your feedback. It's been a difficult process, and like you said, it's one of those things that's a little bit unusual. So honestly, I didn't really know where to turn to for advice. So I really appreciate it. I am, testing the water, so to speak, and if I agree. I've been making an effort to, if I'm 51% on board, yes, we'll go ahead, and just patiently waiting to see, if it will come back over time, because the body does heal itself. Mm-hmm. Things are changing, so it's just trying to find the patience.
Yeah, I understand.
And anyway, I really, really appreciate your feedback and just having somebody to bounce these ideas off of, because it's literally been sitting in my mind for years, and just having an outlet to be able to say it out loud is helpful, just to speak it. Yeah. So thank you for that. I really appreciate what you guys do. You guys are fantastic. I love you guys.
Oh, thank you so much for calling. And, if you want to continue to bounce ideas off of us or how you're feeling or giving us updates, feel free to call back. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
For sure. Have a good night, Eli. All right. We have got one more person on the line. Let's go to Patrick.
Hey, Patrick, what can we do for you today?
Hello.
Hey, thank you so much for taking the call. I really appreciate it. The ACA is amazing, and I've only recently discovered all of these fantastic programs. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for watching.
What I wanted to speak about is something that's been kind of torturing me for a long time, and that's repressed memory. The backstory is I went to a Catholic primary school. I identify as a gay atheist, and I have extremely explicit memories of seeing some pornographic material in a school classroom at the age of about 8 or 9. They're very vivid. I could almost describe exactly what I saw, where I was, and the only thing is I can't remember who else was around me or what the circumstances were around that. It worries me because it feels to me like I've repressed the rest of the memory, and I'm not sure if anyone's had this sort of experience, but it's so vivid and so descriptive in my mind, I can't believe that I would have fabricated something like this at that age.
Yeah, well, I definitely hear what you're saying, and I guess I just want to sort of comfort and caution you by letting you know that memory is a very, very tricky thing. I'm certainly not, as a stranger on the internet, going to tell you that, yeah, this is definitely made up, or yeah, this is absolutely a real and repressed memory. And I would encourage you to maybe distrust anybody who does say anything definitive, because even as you're describing how incredibly vivid and realistic it feels, I would really caution you as seeing that as any sort of proof positive of any particular experience.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it just seems so interesting that of all these childhood memories, this one would just be so vividly sitting there. And yeah, I guess, as you say, memory is something that we can fabricate or we can, manipulate in some ways. But it just, again, I guess the notion of it being so sexually related, and it was looking in a magazine. It's a very vivid picture in my mind, and it just seems so descriptively kind of there from such a young age, and it's been with me my whole life. I'm 52 now, and I must have only have been maybe 8 or 9.
Yeah, before I let y'all jump in, I guess I would just say a little bit further that, yes, memories can be tampered with. Yes, our memories are incredibly unreliable, much more so than I think most people recognize on a regular basis. But I would maybe say, if it's any comfort, that it's likely not a fabrication, in the sense that this isn't some sort of forgery. It isn't as if you sat home and just sort of convinced yourself into thinking something fake. In the case of sort of a false memory, if I even want to use that term, it's more likely that this is something that your brain sort of assembled out of leftover parts and pieces from other things. So it's not to say that it's made up, but that it's sort of constructed, and all of our memories are constructed. So I want to again say that this may very well be a genuine and verifiable experience, but beyond that, I think it's curious what it means to you and why it feels important.
Right. That was going to be my question. It sounds like it is interesting to me that there is a memory that you have that is so vivid and so kind of explicit for the time that you are describing, being 8 or 9 in a Catholic school. But yeah, I am also curious, alongside Christy, what about this it almost feels like it seems sinister to you in some way, and I'm curious what implication you're putting on this memory.
And I'll just
thank you for asking that, because I guess it articulates it well.
That I was going to say basically the same thing. This clearly means something to you that's really profound, and so if you can, I would try to interrogate that with a therapist and just kind of figure out what it means, and I think then you might get some clarity around it.
Yeah, I guess the circumstance being in a school setting, and there is a notion of something just slightly sinister, because it concerns me that it would be, in the back of a classroom, obviously in a lunch break, or not other. I don't consciously remember there being other children around. And I guess it worries me to a degree. Has that been an impact or something that's kind of been a scarring thing that I've hidden from myself? Or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. But I just wonder whether it's just one of those memories I shouldn't bother exploring further. I think I'm a fairly well-balanced person now, but I just, there's a notion of wanting to explore it to a degree, but I'm not sure whether I'm a bit fearful of that too.
Yeah, well, I would say that if it's been with you this long and it's something that you felt the need to call in about, it's definitely something that I would explore personally with a therapist. I'd go down that route if that's something that you feel would benefit you. I also I'm curious if there is a little bit of a cultural overlay, a cultural lens here that we're looking at this through, which is pornography is scarring and bad and addictive and something to fear or mistrust or get rid of in some way. That is not to say that it couldn't potentially be scarring to you, or this isn't a memory that you should explore. But also, I would caution the concept that because it was pornography or you are remembering a pornographic image, that it necessarily translates to some kind of sexual scarring or anything that would affect you long term.
That's great advice, yeah. And it's actually, yeah, I have very different views on pornography now that I'm a recovering Catholic. So, and listening to the shows, particularly on the ACA and this particular program, has actually broadened, I believe, my outlook and my sense of where I fit into the scheme of things. So I can't thank you guys enough for the quality programming, and I wouldn't underestimate the amount of care and the amount that the shows have benefited people. I know they certainly have me.
Oh, thank you so much. That
Very
means a
glad to
lot,
hear it.
Patrick. Awesome. Well, if you do decide to delve into this a little bit more, then I would say you're more than welcome to call us again and let us know how that goes.
And I'd like to add just one final thing. Childhood religious socialization is extremely powerful, and it does take us decades and perhaps sometimes our entire lives to shake everything. I was viscerally afraid of going to hell and being tortured forever for probably a decade and a half after I intellectually stopped believing in hell. And, I still don't even know everything that I'm still unpacking. So if you talk about your attitude toward pornography changing, it sounds like whatever this memory specifically means, you're dealing with something that has to do with childhood socialization versus where you are now. And maybe that's worth thinking about.
Oh, look, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much,
Have a wonderful
Patrick.
night.
Yeah, that is a very interesting call. I hope he calls back. That would be very interesting to continue to hear about. I think that, yeah, I don't know. There's definitely the element where, yes, religious socialization is difficult to get out of, even if intellectually you no longer believe or maybe even have never believed. It is still a cultural lens that you're looking at the world through, and that takes a long time, if at all, to fully take off.
Emotional programming.
Right, exactly. And this is exactly the kind of thing that they, the sinister metaphorical they, want the reaction to be, oh, this is bad.
Right.
Oh, this is something I need to be scared of. This is something I need to worry about. And sometimes, yes, I'm not discounting that as a possibility, but I'm wondering if it would have the same sinister weight if it was a picture book.
Different circumstance.
A different thing
Yeah.
that was being seen.
Well, and I suppose I would say, and I don't want to make any assumptions about any one particular case or anything along those lines, but because of movies and sort of the way that they often handle memory and mental illness and these different things,
Yeah.
I feel like people often have this concern that they're going to discover something mysterious about themselves, that they're going to speak to a therapist and all of a sudden have like a revelation and recognize this like terrible, deep, dark thing that they had repressed and shoved so far down. And I just...
Thank you, Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah, and it makes for a great story. And it's not to suggest that nobody has ever had like a sudden revelation. Obviously, that's kind of how therapy tends to work. But I don't know that people are ever truly like shocked and surprised by some mysterious gem that was hidden inside their brain all along. It just generally doesn't work that way.
The 1945 movie Spellbound. Anybody?
Yeah.
Anyone? The lions in the white make me freak out, and it's because of a skiing accident. No, never mind. It's because I pushed my brother off a wall and into a fence. Just like layers and layers of...
Oh, hell. I mean,
Yeah.
like the MASH finale. I mean, we could just go on and on and on. There were
stop.
4 lights. I mean,
There were
yeah.
4 lights. Oh, my goodness. Speaking of, everybody go watch the Picard series. It's really good. All right. But we are at the bottom of the hour. Chrissy, this was amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for giving us your thoughts, your perspective, for sharing your stories. It means a lot that you came back to the show.
Anytime. Thank you so much, V and Christy. I love the show, and I really enjoy getting to chat with you both.
Yeah. Do you wanna pitch anything while you're here? We know that we can reach you on Twitter at C_Stroop, and your website is cstroop.com.
Yeah, and I'm writing a lot for Religion Dispatches these days. And also for a new, pro-democracy website called The Conversationalist. So check that out. And I'll just remind everybody, that Empty the Pews, Stories of Leaving the Church, came out back in December, and if you had this experience of leaving sort of hardline or high demand religion, and it left you feeling isolated, this is a good book to help you feel less alone. And that's partly why my friend and co-editor Lauren O'Neill and I wanted to put together an anthology like this, because we think these stories need to be out there in the public sphere, which is also a great thing because, it relates a lot to the kinds of things that you discuss on secular sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So many queer narratives in this book, so many that touch on patriarchy and purity culture.
Yeah. If you look at the evangelical community as a whole, it's disproportionately to the national average, very highly LGBTQ plus. It's not coincidence that that's the case.
I think it's disproportionately female too. Mm-hmm. And in this book, we didn't try to do this, but 16 out of the 21 essayists are women. So yeah. That's one little kind of anecdote. But the Evangelical Facebook group, which I'm no longer a mod or an admin of, but I used to be, has over 6,000 members. And last I saw the breakdown, it was also, like 65% women and more than 1% custom gender.
Yeah. If you are looking to get more secular sexuality in your life, you can find us on Twitter at SecularSex. And we also have our voicemail box. So if you would like to leave us a message, if you either can't call the show at the time that we're on air or you would rather leave it as a voicemail, you can reach us at 512-666-0ASK. That's 512-666-0275. And we would love to play those on the show and answer them in the same manner that we do calls and emails. Chrissy, thank you so much for being here with me always.
Absolutely. Glad to have you back.
Yeah. It's good to be back. It's good to be back.
I wish you were still in Portland.
I know. So do I. Let's not do that.
But yeah, I'll get to see you both in Phoenix.
Yes. Looking forward to it. All right.
Well, with that, I suppose it's time to thank everybody for joining us. Of course, thanks all of the folks in the booth that make this show possible.
Woo.
I appreciate y'all.
I'm addicted to masturbation.
Thank you.
And their incredible soundboard, which they enjoy. And I guess encourage everybody to get plugged into the ACA, to join us on Facebook and in Discord. And then I suppose after that, to give yourself a big ol' orgasm. Or, better yet, give somebody else one.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.